My name is Michael Thomas. I'm Director of Industrial Services here with the Together branch of the ASU. I want to thank Giri Sivaraman, who's the Employment Law Principal at Maurice Blackburn. We're really lucky to have him. Maurice Blackburn, as you know, has been doing a range of things recently, and they're champions of employment rights and experts in it. So we're really lucky to have Giri spend his time with us today. What we're going to do in terms of the format, we've got the series of questions that have been sent through. So I'm just going to throw to Giri, and Giri will go through those because some of them cover similar topics. At the end of that, we'll be able to send this recording to people who can't make it today. But if you are on and you have any follow-up queries, just put them in the chat and we'll either respond to them today or come back to you. So with that, I might throw over to you, Giri, and unless I have any little two bobs worth to add as we go along, I'll give it to you.
Thanks, Michael. Hello all. I know some people are getting the recording afterwards, so I guess you won't see it now, but we'll try and do the question justice. Thanks for the warm welcome, Michael. I'm really happy to be here. The Together Union is an excellent union. So if you're a member, well done. I'm a member, and this is a great initiative, and we'll try and go through this. I'll just preface this all by saying JobKeeper is a beguilingly complex subject area. It's one which seems simple on its face. You get a payment of $1,500 a fortnight, and that's that. It's actually much more complicated. And disputes are being filed and some are being resolved, but there's not a lot of case law to guide answers. So I'll do the best I can, but sometimes it'll be a case of, well, there's no actual decision on this, so this is what I think, but I can't point to an authority that confirms it. I think the easiest way to do this is I'm just going to go through the questions as they got submitted in the order that they got submitted. That seems like the easiest and fairest way to do it. So I'll just jump in. First, I'll read out the question too, so because people may not have had the benefit of seeing other people's questions. So the first question was from Natasha, and apologies in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name, but Natasha, who asks, I'm currently on work cover and only working reduced hours of 8 hours a fortnight. Work cover pay the remaining 76 hours to my employer. My employer had me fill out the application, assume that's JobKeeper, yet I'm not receiving it. I'm still being paid by work cover. I think they're pocketing the money. Am I entitled to work cover and JobKeeper? I was told by the tax office I should be getting both. So Natasha, to answer your question, if you were fully incapacitated, which you're not, but just so that people understand, if you're fully incapacitated and getting work cover weekly benefits, you wouldn't be able to get JobKeeper. But in your case, you're partially incapacitated, hence you're able to work 8 hours a fortnight. And if your employer successfully applied for the JobKeeper payments, they have to pass on the money to you, but they have to pay you the minimum wage condition to be able to obtain the money from the government. That's the way JobKeeper works, and this is going to be relevant for quite a few questions. It's a reimbursement scheme. So what happens is the employer's got to satisfy the wage condition, which is paying $1,500 a fortnight to the employee, and then they get reimbursed by the government. In this case, the Work Cover Act, the Workers' Compensation and Rehabilitation Act, says that your payments from work cover can be reduced by the amount of JobKeeper payments. So work cover can reduce how much they have to pay you by up to the $1,500 that you might receive. So if work cover's payment to you is less, the way I think this will work is if what you get is less than $1,500 from work cover and your employer successfully applied for JobKeeper, the employer has to at least pay the difference in advance to satisfy the wage condition. And then it can get reimbursed afterwards. And if it's not paying you the difference, and if for some reason your pay is reduced because work cover's reduced it, but the employer isn't stepping in and covering that difference, then yes, there is a problem, and you should probably first approach your employer about it, confirming that you and the company are eligible for JobKeeper payments. And if you still don't get the money, you can notify a dispute to the Fair Work Commission about that. So I think that answers that. Michael, is there anything you want to add to that?
Look, I think just to say, I think what Giri said at the outset is really important to remember, that this was set up to maintain a link between employees and employers. So rather than just give the $1,500 directly to the individuals, they did it through funneling through the employers to maintain the link. But it's not the employer's money. It's money that is funneled through employers to employees. And as Giri says, that comes up in a lot of the other questions. So.
Right. So next question's from Kylie. How long is JobKeeper lasting? So at the moment, it's been proclaimed only to last to the 28th of September 2020. There are discussions to extend it, and I note that the ACTU, headed up by Sally McManus, has been tirelessly working to have it extended by up to 6 months. And there is talk, and it's only talk, of it being extended for at least particular industries, which is going to be relevant for another question later on today. Nothing's been confirmed. What I've seen reports that the Prime Minister will make an announcement in July, early July, about extension of the scheme. But that's all it is, it's talk. So I don't know, Michael, if the union has any more intel than that.
No, I guess my perception of it, looking at what happened in the childcare industry, is the government will say, yes, JobKeeper is extending to September, but JobKeeper in September may not look like it is now. So there is still a possibility that it is, given that we've flattened the curve probably quicker than expected, that there may be some industries that are caught earlier, even though JobKeeper continues. And certainly, as Giri said, there's been some rumblings of the potential need to keep other industries supported in some way, but certainly the message coming out of government is they're wanting to try and get back to some sort of what they're going to call normal as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Okay, next question is from Kerry. Village Roadshow theme parks telling employees to return to work but only offering 30 hours per week, which equates to the JobKeeper payment. Employees who are contracted to work Sundays will not get penalty rates as VRTP are only offering Monday to Friday work. So if your employer is qualified for the JobKeeper scheme, they're entitled to give you JobKeeper directions. And so I don't know if the employees here are casual or permanent. If they're permanent employees who normally work more, so 35 or 38 hours a week, the employer could issue a JobKeeper related partial stand down for the remaining, say, 8 hours and which includes weekend work. They can't just issue that. They've got to consult with you first though. And then they've got to give you at least 3 days notice of it. If you're a casual and you may have often got more hours than that, the nature of casual employment is there is no fixed guarantee of future hours. So the employer can decide how many hours it wants to offer you, and you can decide how many hours you might want to work. It depends, I think, on the nature of your engagement, but there are certainly some requirements before a JobKeeper enabled stand down direction is to be issued. Next question is from Wayne. Wayne says, is this suitable for me? I am an employee that was left out of JobKeeper because my employer picked who he wanted to include. I understood one in all in, and I do meet the requirements. 18 months, same employer, casual bus driver. Yeah, good question. They're all good questions, but this is a real issue. The JobKeeper scheme was meant to operate on a one in all in basis. However, that is not actually a rule contained within the payment rules. The payment rules set out all the rules that are required for an employer to qualify. You do, Wayne, you do qualify because you're a long-term casual. You've been in regular and systemic employment for more than 12 months. And the question is, I'm not sure what your situation is now, in that whether it sounds like you're just not getting offered shifts because you're a casual, and you're not getting the JobKeeper payment. And I think there's an argument you've been unfairly excluded, and I would suggest you notify a JobKeeper dispute to the Fair Work Commission about the failure to provide you with the payments. Just as an example that might help with this, I ran a case for someone recently, a woman who was working in a surgery in Robina, where everyone in the surgery except her was offered the JobKeeper payments, but she instead was made redundant. And it was an elective surgery. And so we ran the case that it wasn't a genuine redundancy because the surgery would reopen once elective surgery restarted. And that means that it's not the case a job was no longer required. It was just that temporarily it wasn't, and they could apply for JobKeeper to maintain her employment, and they chose not to. And in the end, we actually got her reinstated by agreement, which is a rare thing in this world. But I think it's just an example that argument can be successful. Not sure, Michael, if you want to add anything to that. You're on mute, Michael.
That's because I was told to make sure I was on mute if I wasn't speaking. The issue there is the casual, because what JobKeeper doesn't do is supplant the rights of employers generally to make someone redundant or to reduce hours of casuals and so forth. So some of it will go down to the motivation as why they're trying to do it. So, if they sent you an email saying, even though everyone else is getting JobKeeper, we don't like you, so we're not going to offer you any more shifts, that might be problematic for them. But I think the Fair Work Commission is certainly accepting disputes on it, and in some ways you've got nothing to lose by at least lodging a dispute, which you could do through your union.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. Next question is from Natalie. I'm paid monthly, and in my first pay, which included JobKeeper, I took annual leave in the first fortnight, which paid more than $3,000. My company won't pay me the JobKeeper for the second fortnight in that pay cycle. Am I entitled to that second fortnight of $1,500, even though my monthly pay was over $3,000 due to annual leave? Short answer is yes. That's because the employer's eligibility for each employee is assessed on a fortnightly basis. So the fortnights are actually set out in the rules. So that means you need that the employer, as I said, I was talking at the outset about satisfying the wage condition, that is paying the $1,500 for the fortnight to be reimbursed the $1,500 by the government. So they can't say, oh, we paid you more last fortnight, we're not going to pay you the $1,500 this fortnight. They have to satisfy the wage condition for each fortnight. So yes, you're entitled to that second fortnight of $1,500. Michael, do you want to jump in, or shall I keep going? Yep, okay. Next, Tony. Casual with company contract with a law enforcement transcription, over 65 with asthma. I'm sorry, Tony, I'm not sure what the actual question was, but if you're wondering whether or not you're entitled, then potentially, if you're in a casual, you have to be a long-term casual, so regular and systemic employment for more than 12 months. And if you've done that, you would qualify. I suppose the other issue that comes out of that is if you've got comorbidities and are at higher risk to COVID, what are the implications there for working? And yes, your employer must provide a safe workplace. It sounds to me, if it's transcription, I'm not sure. It would depend on which court. A lot of courts are operating by Zoom or Microsoft Teams, so you may be able to do that job anyway. But I think beyond that, I'd need more specific information really to help you.
I think, Tony, we can probably, when you get this, if you follow up with us, we can at least try to get some more information, because we'll really need to have a better feeling for what's happening.
Yep. Maxine, I'm moving house and need a couple of days off, and I was told I need to use my annual leave. Do I get the full JobKeeper plus the hours used from my annual leave? No, well, I'll say that firstly, it's not clear to me whether you've been stood down or not. If you've been stood down, I don't see why you'd need to take leave to move house. That seems unreasonable, but otherwise, no, you don't get both. You receive either the greater of $1,500 per fortnight, or the normal remuneration for hours worked. So the hours taken as annual leave count towards your hours worked for the relevant fortnight. So it's one or the other. If you've worked and including the annual leave, the hours exceed what would equate to 1,500, you'll get that, but otherwise you'll just get the 1,500. Annual leave doesn't sit separately in that sense. Linda, can my employer stand me down to bring other employees back to do the same job? So you can stand employees down pursuant to a JobKeeper stand down direction. The question is, I suppose, why are other people being brought back and not you? If it's a case of a bunch of people doing a similar job, and some are being brought back and some are not because capacity is reduced, because demand is reduced, then it's probably going to be seen as reasonable. On the other hand, if it's the case that you're not being brought back for some sort of discriminatory reason, you may be able to challenge that. So it does depend a bit on what actually is happening here. And if you say, actually, there's only one job and someone else has been brought back to do it and I've effectively been made redundant, there may be an argument there about constructive dismissal. But I mean, I'd be careful about that, because the reality is there'll be repercussions in the sense you won't be able to get the 1,500 per fortnight going forward, although you will receive redundancy pay. So I think you might want to speak to the union afterwards and give some more information. I can only answer that in a general sense, as I've done. Kerry, I'm a travel agent. Please tell me they'll extend the JobKeeper for us. Yeah, Kerry, look, feel your pain. That's a very difficult industry to be in at the moment. And as I said, there's talk about extending it, particularly for hard-hit industries, but there's nothing official yet. Ebony, what happens if the employer's earnings go over 70%? So does JobKeeper stop? Sorry. So the basic test for turnover looks at either a calendar month or a financial quarter for the employee that compares to the same month or financial quarter in 2019. And that assessment is theoretically meant to take place at the beginning or end of a fortnight, JobKeeper fortnight. I think that's practically very difficult. And I think most employers are saying, look, for the whole quarter, we can say now we're not going to be, we'll be less than 70% of what we earned last year at the same quarter. But if the assessment is made and it's no longer less than 70%, then yes, as a matter of how the scheme works, they will no longer qualify. Next question is from Veda. At the moment, I'm still hired by a company, but I'm not working. I'm getting JobKeeper, but then I heard that it's finishing up at the end of September. What will happen to JobKeeper then? So it sounds to me like you've been stood down in a JobKeeper enabled stand down. And again, as what I've said previously, it's not clear whether JobKeeper will extend beyond September. The JobKeeper stand down will then have to stop when the JobKeeper schemes stop. So at that point, I suppose, hopefully you'll be brought back on. But alternatively, if you're not, the employer can't just keep standing you down as a JobKeeper direction, and we'll have to look at other options, i.e. a non-JobKeeper stand down or potentially redundancy.
And I think that's the big risk we're going to see. There will be employers that have remained with the semblance of viability because JobKeeper is happening. So yes, there is a risk across the nation that when JobKeeper is turned off, we are going to see employers that probably wouldn't have continued suddenly stop. And there's certainly some reporting this morning that sort of says that we're not seeing the same numbers of employers going into administration or whatever that we would normally see. So it's being artificially propped up by JobKeeper. So there is a potential risk at the end of JobKeeper that some employers may find that they're just still not viable.
Yep. Okay. I'll keep going through the questions. I think I've been given a slight hurry up, so I'll try and get through them more quickly. And I will get to Shirley's question at the end. Okay, John Brent, hello. Can you please let us know, can we use JobKeeper payments to the employee who resigned voluntarily for his annual leave and in lieu of notice? Thanks. No, you cannot. Because as I said, JobKeeper is a wage subsidy. You've got to pay someone $1,500 in wages and then get reimbursed. If you're paying them annual leave or a payment in lieu of notice, you're not paying them wages for the fortnight worked. So short answer is no. Grace, we've been given shifts at work and told not allowed to swap shifts. No time off will be approved. We've been rostered on for up to the JobKeeper amount. For people who normally don't work that much, they have to do the 25-ish hours they've been given. And we've been put on days normally before COVID we'd be unavailable. We're all casuals too. Is this allowed? Thanks. That's a good question. The issue, so Grace, if you're a genuine casual, then as confirmed by the federal court last week in a pretty important decision, a genuine casual doesn't have a guarantee of future hours, nor do they have to give a guarantee of working future hours. So in theory, if you're a casual and someone says, I want you to work these extra shifts, and you say, no, I don't want to, you don't have to. However, we're in an unusual environment where there are specific JobKeeper changes to the Fair Work Act that allow an employer to issue a direction about the hours that you work. I've only found one decision on this. It was a decision where the employer wanted to increase some casuals' hours to 25 hours a week and bring some down and level it all out. And some of the casuals said that's not a reasonable direction. And Senior Deputy President Sams of the Fair Work Commission said, actually, I think it is reasonable in all the circumstances, taking into account all of the considerations for the employer in a difficult situation. So generally speaking, you couldn't be asked to do that. But if it's a JobKeeper direction, then you may be on more difficult ground to say no. But you could still notify a dispute about it to the Commission and get them to justify themselves. And if they just say, well, the only reason we want you to work 25 hours is because we want to get every last hour out of you for the 1,500, that's probably not going to be seen very favourably by the Commission. But if it's something more than that, the Commission might accept it. Do you want to say anything about that, Michael?
No, I think that's right. The casual is more difficult. Yes, you have a right to refuse, but then the employer also has, that's a right that you have regardless of JobKeeper. But the employer also has a right not to offer you shifts, regardless of JobKeeper. So I think that's problematic, and I think that answers. I know we do have some time pressures. I think that answers a lot of questions, Giri, around that sort of casual.
Yeah.
So perhaps if people didn't get their specific questions about you being asked to do more as a casual, come back to us. It's different if you're a permanent part-time. If you're a permanent part-time and they try to, there is a capacity for them to issue a JobKeeper directive to reduce your part-time hours. There is no capacity to ask you to increase your part-time hours. So there is a different situation with a permanent part-time versus a casual. I was wondering, Giri, if we could go to perhaps Shirley's questions, and while we're doing that, I'll have a look through the ones we haven't got to that don't relate to casual, in case there's one or two more we want to pick up in this session. Otherwise, the people whose questions we don't get to, we can probably come back to you with some notes on it outside of the session anyway.
Yeah. All right. So Shirley's question is there a definition for regular and systemic work schedule for a casual? As an agency nurse, I'm available every week for work. Have been with the agency for 18 months. I don't always get a shift offered every week, as there are sometimes quiet weeks when there are not enough shifts offered one to everyone. However, if I am available but not offered a shift, would those weeks still qualify as work weeks, as I'm available and would take a shift if offered? My employer advises I've only worked 18 weeks from 52 for JobKeeper eligibility purposes. However, I was open and on the availability roster every week. So I think, Shirley, the issue here is you're on you say I'm available and have been with the agency for 18 months. And I assume what happens is the agency places you in different places to work. These things are not science, they're more art in terms of determining whether something is regular and systemic. If it was every week, it clearly would be. And so they say it's 18 weeks from 52, but you say, well, I was available every week and I would have shifts on a fairly regular basis. I think it's arguable that that's regular and systemic across 12 months. I think the larger the gap between shifts, the less arguable it becomes. If there was a 6-month gap in there, you're not gonna make it. If the longest gap was 2 weeks, then better chance of making it. So I can't give you a definitive answer on it, because 18 weeks from 52 is only a third. So there is a potential for large gaps that would make it less regular and systemic. So on its face, it seems arguable, Shirley, but difficult for me to be more precise than that. So Michael, are there any particular ones you want me to turn to?
There was probably just a couple that I thought could be reasonably easily answered. There was one from Linda, which was just about what evidence is needed for sole traders who have yet to lodge their BAS and tax. The ATO website, if you search JobKeeper sole trader ATO, the ATO website has a lot of details, but I think that's more an accountant question than one that I'd ask Giri to answer or I'd try to answer. And the only other one that did come up a couple of times, Giri, is that issue of, can you go and work, if you're stood down and getting JobKeeper, can you go and do another job and get paid for that one? And subject to what you'd say, I think the answer to that is just clearly yes. You wouldn't be able to claim the tax-free threshold on the second one. So you would get taxed at the higher rate for it. But yes, you can. There was a variation on that, and I suppose this is the last one, Giri. A person who's getting JobKeeper on one job, but is being told that if JobKeeper ceases there, she'll get some shifts, but she's working another job where she's not getting JobKeeper. Is there the capacity to swap where you're getting JobKeeper from? And I'm not sure of the answer on that one. I thought it was a good one.
No, you can't. So once you've nominated for one employer, you're stuck with that nominated employer. And if you have, say, both permanent and casual employment, the permanent employment must take preference for any nomination. So that answers that, I suppose.
All right. Look, I think there's a couple other ones there that we'll go through, and if there's, and we can come back if there's any particular notes. I think there's a number of questions that add similarities. So hopefully this session's been really useful. Again, Giri, I want to thank you very much for volunteering your time to do this. We're certainly in interesting times. So yeah, they are all good questions because none of us have dealt with any of this before. So thank you, Giri.
No worries. Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Thank you all.